Hello, Peter O'Doherty.
Hi, Richard.
Look, welcome. And your exhibition, which is The Distance Between Us, is on at King Street Gallery on William in Sydney. Surely you couldn't possibly have known when you decided on that title for an exhibition, presumably quite some time ago, just how much the distance between us is going to mean at this time.
I was making use of the word irony, I think, without even having any clue what was coming. But yeah, a lot of people have been saying, "Oh, how Precy interview." And so yes, I might be able to get a job as a clairvoyant because there's not many jobs as artists left now that we've got the coronavirus taking over. Yeah, but yeah, it was very unfortunate timing. Look, for everyone, I don't feel at all different for everybody I talk to is basically caught up in this. It's like a giant wave that's just keeps on coming towards us as the tide rises, and this thing has just overtaken everything. So it was just as my show was about to start, I had a meeting with the guys at King Street, and we decided that, well, they thought, and I thought too, that it was probably best to pull the opening. At the time, there was a lot of, every day was the news coming through that it was getting worse and worse, and things were getting closed down, and people were thinking about social distancing a lot, and which had been, this thing happened probably a month or two ago, everything felt virtually normal. Not really, we were still talking about it 5-6 weeks ago, but just the week before my show, that every day was more sort of startling news. And we decided to not have an opening, can't really have people in the same room together. So the distance between us certainly did have some resonance, and has been resonating more and more. It's like dropping a stone into a pool. I'm just watching the ripple effect. So coming towards the last week or so now of the show, so it's very good of you to have some interest and have a chat with me.
Well, look, it's a pleasure. And it is, of course, a great shame that this is the new normal. But perhaps it also provides opportunities. And here we are talking in our respective homes, talking to each other, on our phones or our laptops. And I guess the idea is that people can listen to this conversation, but at the same time, perhaps be on the gallery website, looking at the exhibition and looking at the works, so that while you and I have a discussion about them, people can actually look at what it is that we're talking about.
No, absolutely.
One of the things we should start with right at the beginning of the exhibition is the buildings and the complex abstract grids that you have created with for many years now, but with works from some of the pieces in the exhibitions. There are some very large ones overlooking Garden Island or white balconies. They're positively monumental. What's the attraction of those abstract construction grids for you?
They're probably easier than doing landscapes and faces because they don't have too many curves for a start, which makes it a little bit simpler. So it is often, actually, in some ways, I sound like I'm being facetious, but there is a sort of simplicity and a sort of elemental geometry, or rigid geometry to buildings, which for some reason it's just caught my interest all the way through. My father was a carpenter, so I did see houses being built from the ground up and helped, do some of the basic labouring on some of those houses when I was a kid and teenager. So I've always had the interest in it, and I probably almost could have been an architect when I was in early high school, and I was still actually being a diligent student for the first couple of years, and then I got sort of ensnared into a very bad vices, which ended up me becoming a musician. So I've taken a few. It's been a roundabout way of getting back to being I was always an artist, not an artist, but I was always drawing and loved art as a kid. So I didn't go to art school, haven't had any formal training, but after playing music for quite a few years with Mental as Anything and touring a lot, and being in a band with other they were all art students apart from myself. So there was that milieu and atmosphere around me, and we always had a common interest in art. So when we toured, we would always make sure we'd go to art museums everywhere we went. So that was pretty good. I got to see lots of great things, especially when we were travelling overseas and all around Australia and New Zealand. And then when I got married, my wife Susan and myself both just started painting together. It was just something we could do at home, and we both had a really basic elemental interest in that, and she was untrained as well. So we never stopped. Once we got some paints and some paper and then advanced into canvases, it never stopped. And I took my knowledge about house building, I suppose, into the painting. So the houses have kind of been a central part of what I love to do. For some reason, I still drive around the suburbs where I live, and I see houses all the time that I'm taking a lot of photographs every day. I go out and taking photographs, collecting information, collecting source material for new paintings. So it's an endless thing, and in a way, it's good because it just means I'm just wrestling with the challenges of what painting is colour and form and composition. It seems like very sort of simple, elemental collection of things that make up a painting, and I'm still interested in how that is, almost like through a childlike eye. So maybe looking at buildings and the built world, the urban constructed world, is part of that childlike view of just being amazed at what humans can do. So
you've been very committed though for quite a number of years now to the painting of often some very humble types of houses and dwellings, as well as these larger, as we said, almost abstracted, quite modern monumental pieces. Things like the little tiny work called Front Door in the exhibition, and perhaps if people are looking, they can have a look at that image on the website now. That's a tiny piece, 25 centimetres by 25 centimetres, and yet there is a compositional strength in that you responded to in some way.
Yeah, well, I sort of like playing with the scale of the actual format. So like painting small is good because it means you can do something quickly and often in one or two sittings, whereas the bigger you get, the longer it takes and the more labour goes into it. And so sometimes the small ones have that loose early rendition, the first or second draft, which you capture something in that. And if you're doing a bigger painting, it's harder for me to ever get that first or second draft to be the one that comes anywhere close to what the finished painting ends up as. So the bigger they get, just the more of it. It's a bit like building a house, or you say you can spend weeks on them.
There's a larger work, Balgala Bungalow, which clearly you still have that sense of affection in the way in which you portray it. So give us a sense when you see a house, and this presumably is one that you must have seen and decided to paint. When you do see a house, what draws you to decide that, okay, that is the one that I will make into a work?
Often something to do with probably the time of the day, the light, and then the angles and the general composition. And look, a lot of the time I'm traveling, the great thing about having the iPhones that we all carry is that they've got good cameras, so you can take photographs really quickly. So I don't have to sit and do a drawing, in front of the house, which is often better not to do that anyway, because otherwise people will call the police. So I'd rather not have, make trouble. Sometimes people look very suspiciously at me as I'm photographing their houses. So, and a bit nervous, and so I do it quickly and then move on. But I usually see something often, and then I just distill something out of the photograph down to the most basic thing and remove. There's a lot of it's about deleting, so taking out extraneous, things like telegraph wires or telephone poles or too many shrubs in the garden. I like to sort of simplify it. And some people do those beautiful, neat gardens where you can't believe that they've not grown anything there. It's just a bit of lawn, very cleanly cut right up to the edge of the house. And so those sort of houses are always like, it's almost like a painting, before you even start. So sometimes it's easy, and sometimes I have to sort of work a bit harder to draw something out.
Going back to the title of the exhibition overall, The Distance Between Us, one of the things that's very apparent as we have a look at the houses, the larger buildings, in fact, all of the paintings, there are no people. Why not?
No. Well, people are annoying. Richard. Not you, not you. I'm annoying. I know that, but you only got to talk to my wife Susan, and she'll say people are annoying. She spends a lot of time. We spend a lot of time together in the house. We've got a studio house or house studio. It's kind of all turned into every room really is part of the studio. So,
but there is a certain sort of starkness, what seems like a deliberate starkness that you've chosen.
A lot of people paint people, you know. So in a way, I like to sort of differentiate myself by not doing that. I have done in the past. When I first in earlier years, I was putting people into the paintings, and then they become more, to me, it's more pictorial. It's more about, you know, recording almost like a family photograph or something. So I'm taking it away from that. I'm trying to make it something that's completely, almost an abstract thing in its own right. So if you take the people out and take a lot of the other extraneous elements out, somehow turns it into something else anyway. So, you know, and again, if you to do people in there, it just makes it a bit more narrative based or something. And I don't want there to be any narrative. I want it to have its own sense of atmosphere.
But if there were people in there, perhaps you wouldn't be inviting people so much to look really closely at the objects, these houses, these buildings. In some of the other paintings, which we'll talk about in a moment, you know, domestic utensils, areas inside a house or a building. You seem to be inviting people to look really carefully at these objects and these surfaces.
Well, I think when you do see the streets that you live on, and then you drive around the suburbs of the city that you live in or the town you live in, unless it's completely rural. But you know, for me, I've always lived in the suburbs of the city, and there are nothing but buildings and houses and dwellings, and you know they're occupied, and there's people in there, there's families in there, there's you know, and you see people, but a lot of the time you don't, and most of the time they're actually fairly faceless facades, and you know that there's all this life inside. And I think that is quite interesting, pretty intriguing, that there's all this anonymous, unseen life going on inside those houses. So the windows are a little bit like little eyes that you can see into. And if you go out at night and walk the streets, they turn into something you can actually look into. Where the lights are on, you can see inside the houses, and the outside the dark. So they reverse themselves. So I have done a few nighttime paintings, but still resisted the actual occupants. You know, maybe the odd silhouette or something, but yeah, well, it's just interesting. It's interesting how we live, you know, as humans. You know, like we're like this nest of humans. Like we're almost like a plague species now. I mean, look at the situation now with the coronavirus and climate change, and you know, we're really in a kind of pivotal, dramatic time in human existence, I think, and the planet's kind of probably rebelling a bit, and as it should. But I'm not sure how I've got onto that from where I was talking about looking into.
Well, maybe may I take you somewhere else with that, which is the poignancy, particularly at these times now, of the paintings that you've made at airports. I think there's one of an aircraft at Darwin Airport. There's another one taxiing at Beijing Airport. There's a Jetstar aircraft that you can tell by the insignia. These are pretty poignant images now.
Well, it's funny, isn't it? Again, that's very prescient, but you know, all that air travel seems to just die now. When we see an aircraft in the sky, we're all amazed. It's like, whoa, look at that, it's incredible. So it's just everything's changed from last year to now, and I've always had an interest again in things like aircraft, because I still can't quite believe that, you know, humans are smart enough to build those things and make them fly, and then we all go, you know, climb inside them and travel around in them. It's pretty incredible. So a lot of it, I think, is my sense of wonderment. It's like a child's eye. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to love drawing space rockets and, you know, make up things, and you know, I love the Thunderbirds and all those kind of shows with aircraft and you know, science fiction films. And to me, it's like we're living in the future. We are in the future now. You know, we have been for quite a long time in this modern world that we live in. Who knows how long it's going to last for, and that's current kind of form. Who knows? But maybe painting them as something I'm painting. I'm recording something that may not always be around that much.
Mm. Something that has been around for a while has been a particularly identifying painting style that you've had, using the paint that you do, with a certain kind of blur, a certain sort of haze over the object, so that one is not sure exactly where the hard edge of the object is, or even whether a hard edge exists. How did you develop that, and why has that become such an important signature for you?
Well, looking at you on this machine that we're looking at each other on now, I can't see any edges to you, Richard. You're just one big blurry, fuzzy person with a voice coming out of the blur. So I look at me, I can joke about my eyesight, sort of, deteriorating as we all have. I don't always not go without my glasses, but I am now. It's just a stylistic thing that developed, and you try to find your own signature. I think when you're making art, or same being a musician, and I write songs, I think it's the same, very much the same thing. Just looking for something that feels true to you, and I think the soft thing just sort of developed. Like, and it was never really a conscious thing. It was just, that felt like suddenly it was there. Early on I was painting very hard-edged, sharp, delineated, objects, but just somehow the blurring, it's a bit like when you see a black and white photograph, from the 1930s or 40s, or even from now, but it takes it into somehow another realm, and it takes it away from the narrative to the more literal version of what you're looking at. So I guess the edges blurring just means everything kind of morphs into itself, which is part of the physics of reality.
That
sounds quite smart, doesn't it?
Oh no, that was our deep moment. Yeah. Excellent. Let's finish up with some sinks, because you've painted some superb sinks for this exhibition. Again, not the choice that one would necessarily expect if one just looked at very large buildings and large building facades, but with these very intimate pictures, you've taken us into a series of hotel sinks. How did you decide on the sinks that you were choosing?
I've done a few sinks over the years, and I've done the kitchen sink a few times. The kitchen sink painting, which is a school of painting, but not that, again, that wasn't like a conscious thing. But I've done the just messy sink, my own sink, where our dishwasher. We've only ever had a dishwasher that lasted about 6 months, and that one packed up, and so we're back to always having a sink full of dirty dishes, which we try and resist. We compete for not doing the dishes for 2 to 3 days at a time until someone gives in. But that can make a good painting. But the empty sink somehow is also, it's got that a little bit like the facade of a house. It's just this statuesque form, and the good thing about a sink too is it has rounded, almost, you could say, it's like sensuous sort of edges and shapes and forms, and shadows pull in different ways than they do on a flat surface of a constructed building. So I just, they're just the good things in the tiling and in the light and the shadow within a room. It's all just part of, again, just assembling things to make a composition, and I like that simple arrangement of a very basic empty sink, which is quite a beautiful thing, really.
It is indeed. Peter O'Doherty, thank you for sharing your exhibition.
Oh, thanks, Richard. Thanks for talking to me.